Welcome to the next in our series of masterclasses. Today's going to be very focused on the CMS. So we're going to have a talk about the different core content types in Jadu Central and what you can ideally use them for, and some sort of brief chats about best practice and examples, I guess, of what to do and what not to do in terms of using some of the functionality. Unusually for a masterclass, this time I have a slide deck that we'll run through. I'm also going to sort of jump into the control center a little bit as well to show you a few things. But as I said, what we're going to talk about today is really how to use different content types in Jadu and what they're most effective for. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is document pages. Mainly because document pages is probably, I would think, the content type that you would use the most in terms of your web content. Document pages is really designed for presenting your detailed content in a clear, structured way. The benefits of document pages are there's a consistent template, so all of your content will have a consistent look and feel. Using the multiple pages element within document pages also allows you to create a clear user journey through the content. User journey is one of those interesting things that I think people often think about. The user journey is how you get to a piece of content, but actually the user journey also is something that extends through the information in terms of how you present and order that information so the customer gets what they need at the right point. As well as sort of the main content elements, you've got the ability to use reusable page supplements within document pages. So you can add lists of, related links, contact details, adverts for related content, any of those sort of supplements that you might want to use at the side or at the bottom of the page. It's a very simple user interface for creating your content. And you've got your rich text editor and images that you can use. You can also embed code snippets, so anything from third parties like YouTube or Google Maps or anything like that. And you also have the ability to put a document page behind a password in order to restrict access to that content, so that if someone doesn't know the password, they can't view that information. Just for a couple of examples of document pages on customer sites. So if I go to Bolton Council, they've got a pre-application planning advice document. And as you can see, this sort of guides you through the information that you need to use. So they've broken their content up over a number of pages within a single document page. So you've got a page about what the service is, negotiations, what they need from you, costs, how to apply, and then what happens next. So there's a clear user journey through that information, but it's effectively related to a single task. As another example, North Sydney Council, again, very similar. You've got your clear journey through the information in terms of if you want to hold an event in a private park. So as a customer, you can navigate through that. So you can look at the overview, you can browse to the terms and conditions around it, and then you've got your application information. And you've got the navigation at the bottom of the screen as well to move through that information. So in terms of document pages, because there is this ability to add multiple pages in it, one thing we sometimes find is people try and use this for almost creating a section of the website. So in terms of best practice, that's potentially something that we would normally advise against, both in terms of user journey and user experience, and also in terms of search engine optimization. So if I show you an example, so this is just an example I've mocked up, but this is something that I used to come across fairly regularly on sites, particularly local authority sites. You'd have a document called dogs. And within that, there'd be sort of multiple pages. So if I just go into the content and open that in a new tab. So I've got my main title of dogs. And then within this document, I've got a page about reporting a stray dog, page about dog fouling, page about getting your dog microchipped, and then a book a dog training course. Now, this is the sort of approach that we wouldn't recommend using. Document pages are much better suited, as I said, for the user journey and for things like search optimization if they're focused on one single thing or one single task. So what I try to think about is where I've got multiple pages, is there a clear journey through that information? Is the customer going to want to read each of those pages? So in this example, the chances are that the customer doesn't want to complete all of these tasks. They want to do one of them. The other thing in relation to this is for things like search optimization. This main document title is going to be the most important thing that you put on the page. So search engines place a lot of ranking sort of weight behind your main title. So for things like search optimization, a title like dogs isn't particularly useful. It could be about absolutely anything to do with dogs. Whereas if your document was actually called Report a Stray Dog, then it's much more specific, much clearer, and will then sort of perform better within search. So we would normally say with things like this, dogs would potentially be a category within your taxonomy. And then within that, you would normally have, a document about reporting a stray dog, one about reporting dog fouling, etc., etc. Now, if you have got pages like this, it is actually really quick to break them up if you ever need to. So just a quick trick. So if I've created this and I suddenly look at it and think, well, actually, really, I want each of these things to be a separate document in its own right. If I go to the Actions tab, I've got a Save As option. So if I select Save As, I can save it as a new document. I can give it a new title. So I'm going to call this Report a Stray Dog. And then I'll save that as a new item. So I now have a new document called Report a Stray Dog. And then I can simply delete the pages from that copy that aren't relevant to that task. Now, if you've got a document like this where it is only a single page, another trick to use is if you make the document title and the page title identical, when someone's browsing the site, it will only display the main document title. It won't duplicate it. But they have to be absolutely identical for that to work. If you've got multiple pages, then you can give each page a unique title to guide the user through that information. So for example, if I go and pick a different one, so I've got Request Planning Advice as my main title, and then I've got a page about the service, what it costs, and then making a request. So I've got nice clear page titles to guide the user through that information. So document pages give you a lot of scope for, breaking lengthy pieces of content up across a number of pages. So there's a clear user journey through the information, or equally, you can have a single simple page of content. The other thing I was going to mention is I talked about embedding content. Sometimes what you'll find is if you use something like YouTube to grab their embed code, it normally comes as a fixed width and height. And although you can go in and sort of edit the code to remove that to make it responsive, there's a site that I tend to use that makes things a lot simpler. So if I just bring up the site that I use to show you. So this website, embedresponsively.com, gives you sort of a number of standard sort of popular things that people might want to embed. So you've got options for YouTube, Google Maps, images, generic iframes, a range of other things like SoundCloud. And when you select one, it will tell you what information it needs to generate some embed code for you. So for example, in the case of YouTube, it just needs the URL for the video. For Google Maps, it actually asks for the Google Maps iframe. But effectively, you paste in the information that they need, click embed, and that will then generate responsive embed code for you to be able to use in your code snippet, so that your video or your map will be responsive in the same way that the website design is responsive. In terms of resources around document pages, if you're ever looking for any guidance around them, there are details in the user guide about document pages. There's also a section in the user guide about how to manage supplements and how to keep them updated. So moving on to the sort of second type of content. Again, this is probably going to be sort of one of the more popular content types that you use, and that's home pages. So home pages are widget-based pages that allow you to craft things like sort of landing pages to form part of the user journey, or to create more kind of dynamic sort of promotional pages if you want, or to create content wherever you want to use a slightly different layout to the standard document page layout. So with the widget-based approach to home pages, your page structure is fully configurable. There's obviously a standard set of widgets that come out of the box, but we do have a sort of supplementary catalog of widgets. So we have widgets available as a service. If you have internal development expertise, then internally you can develop your own custom widgets, which is what a lot of customers do. Or equally, we can develop custom widgets for you if there's something that you need and you don't have that internal development expertise. So widgets can be, static, that you could just go in and add a bit of content to them. They can pull data from within the CMS to present information on a landing page, or they can be integrated with third-party solutions to pull data in from somewhere else. Also with home pages, as with document pages, you have that ability to use reusable page supplements. And the user interface is really sort of just a simple drag and drop interface. So if we're looking at a couple of examples of home pages, sort of a more complex sort of promotional type homepage might be something like Wayne State College's admissions landing page. So this is a category landing page within the platform, but it's a very sort of magazine type promotional landing page. So each one of these elements on here is a different widget. For a more kind of basic task-driven kind of landing page, there's something like, if we look at North Sydney Council, they've got their hold an event landing page, with some basic calls to action and links to content. So it's a much simpler page. Home pages can be as simple or as complex as you need them to be. And it's really just down to your imagination and how you use your widgets, how you want to pull them together. So in terms of home pages, obviously you have the basic homepage designer where you can add your rows and you can drag your widgets in and organize them. In terms of best practice, one thing that we often come up against is there's sometimes some confusion around the process for activating landing pages for categories. There's a chance that if you don't do it absolutely correctly, you can sometimes end up with things like duplicated breadcrumb navigation. So if I've got this sort of planning landing page, if I want to activate it for my planning category, I'd go back to home pages. I go to activate category pages. I'll drill down to my planning category and I'll say, yes, that's the home page I want to use for my category landing page. So if I go back to home pages and go to planning, if I go to actions and view live straight away, you'll see I've got this duplicated breadcrumb at the top here. And if I go back a step in the breadcrumb navigation, I'll effectively get the same content. So what's happening here is where I've got this duplicated breadcrumb, this is effectively my homepage as an independent piece of content that sits within the category planning. So at the moment, this all looks a bit odd because I'm using this as my category landing page as well. So there's a step that you can take to fix that. So if I go back into home pages and I go to actions, I've got an option here for default URL. So let me come back here. So you'll notice if I'm looking at the duplicated breadcrumb page, my address is /homepage/51/planning. When I go to the category, it's just /planning. So if I go to actions and default URL, you can see at the moment the default URL is set to the homepage as an independent piece of content. If I change that to /planning and then update the page, when I go to view it live now, it will take me straight to the category page, so I can use that as my key link. There are a lot of out-of-the-box widgets that are available to you. And normally what we find is during your implementation, you'll have been given a design with certain widgets as part of the design. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to always stick to that. So for example, you might not have the directory search widget as an example in your design, but it may be that you're using a directory for something and you want people to be able to search that directory straight from a landing page. So you could just add that in wherever you need it. So as I said, home pages, you have a lot of control over the structure of the page. And how you use them. As I said, they can be used as landing pages or using things like the content widget and images and other element types of widget. You can use them for presenting content as well if you want a slightly different layout to the standard document pages layout. So resources around home pages, again, you've got the user guide. That covers home pages and also, as before, managing supplements. In terms of additional modules and enhancements, we have the catalog of widgets. So if you're looking for additional widgets, we do have them available. Or as I said, we can develop custom widgets for you, or you can do that yourselves if you have the internal skills to do that. Directories is the other, I guess, core content type for presenting information. We did do a masterclass on this a number of months ago, so I'm going to touch on this relatively briefly in this class. What directories are useful for is where you've got structured data and you want to present a number of records that people can search. Each directory has its own dedicated search. Records can be linked to locations using the maps field within a directory. There's always an A to Z of records. You can organize records by categories that are specific to the directory. And as I mentioned, when we talked about home pages, there's a directory search widget that you can drop onto relevant landing pages. Directories gives you complete control over the record structure, so the fields that you want and the order that you present them in. There's lots of different field types ranging from rich texts to Google Map fields, email fields, plain text fields. And you have multiple ways for a user to locate a directory. So by default, there's the A to Z and the search option. If you're using categories to organize your directory records, people can also drill down through a list of records using that category structure. There's also a couple of options for sort of user-generated content with approval in directories. So one thing you can do with directories is you can actually, as part of the default directory functionality, enable user submission of records. So for example, if you had something like a local business directory, you could open that up so local businesses can actually submit their data directly to the directory. and manage that themselves via their account page. You have approval. So when a business submits a record or updates it, you have to approve those changes. But it means that you don't have to be responsible for managing that content. You can also, if you've got Jadu Central Forms, you can generate a directory record from a form submission. So if you've got something like, I don't know, an example we did with a customer recently was an ability for a school to raise a job advert request. And effectively, the customer was using directories for presenting the job adverts with our online forms for the advert request. So that form generated the directory record that they could then go in and review and approve. Just as some examples of directories, we've got the City of Edinburgh Council's policies register. This is a really sort of great example of how you can, actually get all of your policies in one place on a website. So for people who are interested in policies, they've got one place they can find them rather than them being scattered across the site. But as you can see, we've got a keyword search option. There's the A to Z option if I know what the policy is called that I'm looking for, or you can browse by category. So if I go to children, families, social care, I'll get a list of policies for that particular service area. So this is using all three of the different navigation options for the directory. Another example, if we jump over to Australia, is the City of Wanneroo's Coastal Projects directory. Again, this one's using, sort of navigation to take you directly to records. You've got A to Z, and you've got the directory search. Now, these sort of are both examples of sort of the standard kind of out-the-box directories functionality. So if I go to the A to Z of records on Edinburgh site, for example, you can see that, I've just got a list when I pick a letter. Now, you can do things with directories. Again, if you've got internal development skills, to change these templates. So to show you an example of something that one of our customers has done. So Wayne State College, they've got a student clubs, organization and groups directory, but they've customized the A to Z template. So rather than a list, it actually gives you an image, title, and a summary sentence for each of their directory records. So that's a sort of custom template. It's just a bit more sort of dynamic, I guess, than the sort of out the box option. So I won't spend a lot of more time talking about directories. As I said, we've got a whole masterclass available about directories. I had a question about carousel widget on home pages. Is this a standard widget? No, it's not a standard widget. It's one of our catalog widgets. So it's one that customers can select as part of the design implementation, or it's available separately. One thing I would say with carousels is they look great, but they're not necessarily particularly useful. There's a lot of research that suggests that people don't tend to interact with them. But they're nice to look as a way of promoting something visually. But yes, the widget is available as a separate widget. It's a question about the URLs in relation to directory records, and getting user stats and user journey details from the directory. Is there a plan to include directory reference within the record URL? I can take that back and ask the product team if there are any plans to make any changes to that. It is something that we can put in the there's a online features suggestion board, so you can raise anything like that there. But I will ask the product team about that for you. And then I've got a question. In order to add a policy document to a directory, do you need to first upload it via downloads, then use the URL field in the directory? Um, yeah, so you would need to upload it via downloads. Um, in terms of the URL field, to be honest, tend to avoid using that field because it actually presents the full URL, which isn't particularly useful for things like accessibility. So I tend to use the HTML field for presenting links within a directory record because that then gives me the full rich text editor. So I can go in and format that link either, as a nice text link with some clear link text, or I can even turn that link into a button if I needed to. So news I've just popped in here. It is one of our core content types, but I would hope that news is fairly self-explanatory. Although I did once get asked in a training session what you would use news for. But news allows you to publish your news articles in a consistent way, so they're all presented using the same template. It dynamically generates the latest news page for you, and you also have the option of choosing a top news item. So if there's a particularly important news item, you can flag it as the top news item, and it will display that right at the top of the latest news page in order to highlight it until you come along and then, choose a different top news item in the future. As I said, there's consistent, so all your news items have a consistent structure and look and feel. There's also an automated news archive. So as news stories drop off the latest news page, they're put into the news archive. You can devolve news directly to your news team if you want to. And there's also sort of a news widget that you can drop onto a homepage so that you can display your latest news on the main page. Your configuration options, you've got your headline, your tagline, you've got rich text editor with block quote style for news stories as well. You can embed code snippets the same as you can for other content types. In terms of sort of examples of main news pages, you've got sort of North Sydney Council, so you get your standard list of news, and then your filters, so you can filter by year or by month. These are all fairly similar. So here we've got Edinburgh's latest news one. You can see in this example, they've got a story that's listed as the top news story. So that's privileged above all the other news stories and highlighted. And then Wayne State College, again, they've got development expertise internally, so they've actually gone in and customized their news page quite considerably. So they've added additional filters in, and they've put some sort of content blocks down the side as well. Yeah, I mean, news is pretty straightforward to manage, as with most content types. So you've got your block quote style, so you can drop block quotes in there. If I just kind of view that live, but then your news stories all have that kind of consistent look and feel. Okay. One thing I'd always suggest with news is, just for best practice, trying to determine how long you keep your news stories on your website for. We've got some customers that take different approaches to this, some that leave news on the site forever. So once a news story is published, it just stays there. Some customers like to, keep their news archive for a certain period. So if you wanted your news stories to automatically be taken offline after a certain period of time, you can use the out-of-the-box content scheduling functionality to schedule a sort of future offline date for that news story, so that just, after 2 years or however long, it just automatically gets taken off the website. Some customers sort of have a bit of a combined approach where they, publish their news stories and they stay there forever, unless it's a news story that might be a bit controversial in the future. So we had a local government customer who used to always publish news stories about sort of successful benefit fraud prosecutions. And they decided with those that they would only publish those stories for a short period of time. So that, they're there as an immediate example or a current example. But, after, say, 12 months, those stories were taken offline. Again, in terms of resources, you've got the user guide around news. Okay. Events, again, I've put this one in here just as, it's one of our standard content types, but I would hope events is fairly self-explanatory. You can publish your events information, present all your events in a consistent way. There's a dynamically generated events listing page, the ability to have a pick of the week event. So your pick of the week will appear at the top of the page for the week that it's happening. There is default functionality to enable public submission of events with an approval process behind it. As with all content types, you can devolve it to relevant teams. You can configure sort of event locations that you can reuse as well. So if we just look at a couple of event examples, we've got Lichfield District Council's events. So you've got their pick of the week event highlighted at the top, which looks like it's an event that's going on for a long period of time that they're promoting. And then they've got their list of events and the ability to filter by location or by period. And then again, another example of someone who's customized the page a lot. Wayne State have done quite a lot of customization on their templates. So they've got a lot more filter options. They've added some more content around event submission as well. And they're displaying a lot more information from each event within the listing. But in terms of managing events, it's that simple standardized interface that you can use for publishing your event content. For any of these modules, if anyone wants to take a deeper dive into some of these, we can always have a future masterclass looking at a specific content type. So we've got a question about news. So if you schedule a news story, what happens to it after the set date? Okay, so let me jump back to my news control center tab. So in terms of content scheduling, if I go into my content schedule and metadata. So the way content scheduling works is you've got your box checked, say you want to use content scheduling. Your valid to date would be a future publication date for that item. So I could say I want to publish this item on Monday. And then providing it's been approved through workflow, it will be published automatically. In terms of your valid to date, which is what the question's really about. So if I say we want this news story online for a year, the make not live action, what that basically does is it literally just takes the news story offline. So it's unpublished. At that point, it's no longer available on the front end of the website, but it's still there within the control center if you ever have a query about it. So you can always go in and access it directly in the control center unless you actually physically delete the news story. But the action literally just takes it offline. Got a question about adding a valid from time rather than just a date. That's not something you can do at the moment. I know there's discussions around updating the content scheduling functionality, so I can check with the product team around that for you. So the last couple of content types we've got announcements. So Announcements gives you the ability to publish site-wide announcements out of the box. So if you have something that happens that you need to make customers aware of for things like business continuity, then you can publish an announcement that will literally appear at the top of every page across the website. So you can use it for raising awareness of things like local emergencies, service outages. It's really there for signposting, out of the ordinary emergency messaging. You can also save any announcements. So any announcement you create can be saved and used, again in the future if you need to. So if we just have a quick look at announcements in the control center. So you get to give your announcement a title. So currently I've got my online payments unavailable as a live announcement. But for an announcement, you configure your title, the content that you want your message to say, and you have the option of adding a link in there as well. And you can literally just take announcements on and offline. So if I took this one offline, at that point, I wouldn't have an announcement. I do have the ability to sort of pick alternative announcements that are saved and sort of republish them. One thing I would say with announcements is that they're really there for emergency sort of business continuity. We have seen some customers in the past use them as a way of promoting content. The danger with that is that customers can get used to that announcement being there at the top of the page and can ignore it. So if there is an emergency and you are using an announcement to publish it, if customers are used to that announcement appearing at the top of the page all of the time, then they can easily miss it. I've got the question, is there a way we can change the icon on the announcement? There isn't a functionality for that at the moment. So the out-of-the-box announcements give you the ability to, publish a single emergency message across every page on the site. If I just jump back here, we do have an advanced announcements module that's available that allows you to categorize announcements. So yeah, we've got a question about this that's just come in. So you do have the advanced announcements modules and an additional module that's available that allows you to categorize announcements so they only appear in specific sections of the website. That's what part of the key functionality. There is other functionality in there, but we can share details of that, Chris, if it's something you want to look at. So we've got a question about content scheduling for home pages and document pages. There isn't content scheduling for home pages, but there is for document pages. So for home pages, you can schedule a go live date and a sort of future date to either review or remove that content from the website. So if you set a review date, it can prompt you to go in and review your content in the future. So you can use it for ensuring your content's kept up to date, or you can just schedule an offline date if it's content that's not going to be relevant after a period. You don't have to set a sort of future to date for content scheduling. But just for ensuring you keep content up to date and best practice, it's something that I'd always recommend doing, just to give you the option to have a prompt to go in and review content to check it's up to date at regular periods. But the to date is completely optional. Chris is asking, can you set offline for a page within a document? There isn't a way of doing that at the moment. I think on the basis of it that the system's intended to use with document pages, in that they're intended to be a single piece of content in their own right. I'm not sure that if you're using document pages optimally, there would be a need to take individual pages offline. If it is a feature that you feel would be useful, then again, it's something that you can raise via our feature request board, and it's something that the product team can look into. If you raise a feature request, that feature request is also visible to all of our customers, so people can vote on it to support it and add additional comments as well. So the last type oh, so I've just got another question come in. Is it possible to take home pages offline? There isn't a way of taking home pages offline at the moment. There's no kind of separate publication or approval process for home. Well, there is an approval process, but there's no separate publication process for home pages. Again, it's something that's worth checking to see if it's on the roadmap, or raising a feature request for if that's something you felt would be useful. Okay. So the last content type that I popped in here is downloads. So downloads is the feature that allows you to upload files for customer to be able to download documents from the website. So you can upload, PDF files, Word documents, any kind of supporting documentation. The caveats we'd always add around that is, you need to make sure that those documents are accessible to meet statutory requirements. And generally, I would suggest that downloads should be used as a way of providing supporting information, not as a way of providing important information that the customer has to know. So it gives you the ability to easily upload and publish documents. It can generate a dynamic index. So if you've got a large document, you could break it up into a series of smaller PDFs, and the system could then generate an index of those documents. It could be something that you publish as a regular, I don't know, PDF newsletter or something like that, and the system can generate a dynamic index of those. The system automatically also will display things like the document type and the size when you upload the document, so it will show that to the customer. The user interface is straightforward. You can, as I said, you can publish a single file, or you can add multiple files to a download. If you've got multiple files, you can drag and drop them to reorder them. So just as an example, I put one together on here. So I've got a download that I've created here called procurement policy. I've added some placeholder text in, so you've got an optional description that you can add to a download. And then, I've actually thought this is, quite a large file, so I've broken it up into a number of sections. So what would then happen if someone views that? The system displays the title, my brief summary, and then I've got each document that makes up the whole, so I can download an individual section. A download could be a single document, or it could be, a group of documents like this, either as a single document broken up into sort of relevant sections, or, it could be, as I said, a listing of newsletters that have been published. Generally, in terms of downloads, although you can sort of right click on the download now button and copy the URL and link directly to a file, for best practice, we tend to recommend linking to this page for a number of reasons, even if it's a single file, because it gives the customer the additional information about what type of file it is and what size it is. So they can then decide if they still want to download it based on that information. Also, it means that if you change that document, if you've linked to this page and you upload a new version of that document, so you go in and you select the document and you say you want to change the file and you upload a new version. If you do that and you have linked directly to the document, you would then need to go in and change and update your links. If you've linked to this page, you won't need to do anything, because that download now button will automatically update to point to the. So that's sort of a bit of a brief tour through all of the core content types in the CMS. Okay. So I said we have covered directories in the past, so there is a full masterclass around directories. One that we're considering for the future is something that's more around home pages as well. So that's potentially one we could look at and look at examples of widgets. Jonathan's asking, is there a link to the previous masterclass on directories? There's a playlist on YouTube of all the past masterclasses. So if you go to jadu.net/masterclasses, that would take you straight to the full list, Jonathan, so you can access any of them, including the directories one. Okay, so we're in the process of planning for our sort of next masterclass next month. But apart from that, thank you for all of your time today. Let us know if there's anything you want to cover in future masterclasses. And hopefully we'll see you next month. Thank you, everyone.